Hey, I'm Rick.
And I'm Andy.
And this is
Been There, Tap That.
On this episode of Been There, Tap That, we sit down with Ben Thomas of Lighthouse Brewing Company in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. So sit back with us and enjoy a pint. Been There, Tap That.
So yeah, we've been around since 1998. Started in August of '98, and back then we were one of the first breweries to open up in Victoria and in the whole province actually. So there's about 160 breweries now, and we were part of the first group of 10 or so.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
lots changed over the last 20 plus years, but yeah, the focus is still on just making really good beers and beers that we like to drink, and hopefully other people like to as well. So
Nice.
yeah.
So who got Lighthouse started? Where did who kind of brought it together?
Lighthouse started with, there were a couple guys, Paul Hoyne, legendary local beer guy,
Yep.
and just sort of home brewing, doing a lot of stuff on the side, and working at some various other places around town, obviously. And then sort of one thing led to another, where there was a shortage of interesting, unique beers that weren't produced at brew pubs. So,
Right.
The necessity of having a production brewery where you could actually purchase stuff in a liquor store or at a pub, and you didn't have to go to,
right,
Swans or Spins to get your interesting beers.
that's right, yeah.
Because the macros still had like a stranglehold all over the city. It was really difficult to get anything unique or interesting. And so it was sort of out of that, the development of interesting beers on the side, and then finally getting to a point where, okay, this is something that could be pretty cool. So,
Absolutely.
Paul was the guy who sort of masterminded the recipes and the creation of the different beers in the beginning,
Okay.
and then basically found Jerry Heater as a sales guy, who then went on to do Great Canadian Beer Festival for a number of years
nice.
until he recently stopped this past summer. So basically those guys got together. They needed some capital to get off the ground, and that's where my dad came in. He invested in the brewery to get it off the ground, in addition to the other guys throwing some cash in too. So yeah, basically started from pretty humble beginnings with one beer, Race Rocks, which you're drinking
it's
right there.
fantastic.
We were just going to ask, the very first beer.
That's the very first beer. Yeah. So August 17th, '98 was the date that the first kegs of Race Rocks came off the assembly line, and that's when we celebrate our birthday.
Yes,
So
that's right. You
we
just
were-
had your 20th anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's
So
right.
even though we became a business several months prior to that, legitimately, when the first sips were hitting the streets, is sort of what we acknowledge as,
yeah,
the,
of course.
as the birth of the brewery. And 20 years later, we're still doing well. The Race Rocks is still kicking and
Absolutely.
winning awards and tasting awesome. So
20 years later, I mean, the tap room has come together very beautifully, so this is pretty brand new as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the tasting room that we're in opened up on the day of our 20th anniversary.
Oh, fantastic.
Obviously, right now, it's probably hard to believe for some people when they're looking at new breweries opening up. Like, every brewery has a tasting room.
Yeah.
It's part of the deal. It's like part of the business
That's
plan,
right,
right?
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
let's do
Have
this.
to have
Let's
it,
do it.
yeah.
It's a no-brainer. But back in the day, like when we started, or even like Phillips or VI, like the older established breweries, we were a factory. We were a production facility, and a tasting room was not really even part of the deal.
Yeah.
Like, no one would even think about that. So it wasn't that long ago that we started doing growlers. Probably like 6 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe 7.
The original growler station back in the corner.
Yeah, totally. In this room. This was
Yeah,
an
yeah.
office, and there was
The
like,
office, that's right, yeah.
you came in, and there was like, the accountant was over in the corner, and there
Yeah.
was like a little cubby hole where you could get your growlers filled up.
You'd be like, hey, can you fill this up? She'd drop the pen, come running over.
Pretty much. Yeah. Oh, totally.
What was the initial core 4 beer that you guys kind of ran with before you really started branching out into
Yeah.
different ones?
So Race Rocks was the first one. Race Rocks.
The one and only at
Amber
that
Ale,
time.
yeah. August
absolutely,
'98. January '99, we released Beacon IPA, which was always more of an ESB, but we named it an IPA because at that time it was still sort of, the craft beer scene was relatively new, and calling something a bitter may not have been the best
Right.
idea.
Yeah.
So anyway, Beacon IPA ran as our second beer for a long time. Then we released Keeper Stout 2 years later in 2001. Then 2003, we introduced Lighthouse Lager, and the Lager, Keepers, and Race Rocks are all still around in one form or another. And
That's right, yeah, because the Lighthouse Lager, that is now company lager?
yeah, it's Lighthouse Brewing Company Lager.
That's right.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, still a craft lager, all natural ingredients. Just if you want an easy drinking beer and you don't want to drink one of the macros, then you should go for that. After we released the lager, there was actually a bit of a lull, and we were growing and expanding into different formats and stuff like that, and picking up some steam with our existing brands, and at the same time probably resting on our laurels a little bit too much. At that point, other breweries started coming in, and so in fact, by the time 2010 rolls around and we've released Fizzguard, we've only put out like 6 actual full-on beers, lots of one-off casks and things like that. But as far as production beers that are being packaged, over that span of time, there wasn't that many.
Right.
So introduction of some new blood, different brewmasters and stuff like that. Then from 2010 to 2016, there was a huge growth, and a lot of the bombers that you guys can see on the shelves and stuff like that were introduced during that time. So really took an aggressive approach to coming up with new and unique products and trying to do beers that were just kind of out there, in addition to a core lineup of proven winners,
Absolutely.
I guess you could say.
And we've always talked about that, and that's kind of one of the other questions is how, with the art and with the beer theme, have you really been able to distinguish yourself on the shelves? Because it's daunting as a beer drinker when you go into the liquor store or the cold beer store and you have that big wall of, the beer wall, and you're like, oh, there's so many cool labels and names, and what's this, what's that? How have you risen above that and really stood yourself out from the competition?
That's a tough one, especially when you're dealing with packaged product, because you look at a bomber wall or nowadays like a tall can shelf or a bank in the cooler, and there's just so many different things to choose from.
Absolutely.
And which is great from a consumer perspective, because lots of people,
sky's the limit.
you want to try,
yeah,
I only want one of these and I can buy one. I don't have to buy a whole 6-pack or whatever.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it's a constant sort of evolution for us to try to figure out what looks good. We've tried many different things over the years, and we're not afraid to try stuff and have it not work either. So that's part of it.
Taste is very subjective, whether it's art, beer. I mean, people like what they like, and it's nice to have the variety out on the shelves. But yeah.
Well, speaking of that, production-wise, what do you guys usually pull out of here on a general cycle that you're running through?
So, on an annual basis, we're doing about 11,000 hex a year.
Okay.
Or at least that's what we did last year, and a hectoliter is 100 liters.
Yep.
So, it's a decent,
It is
decent number of pints
Decent
that
amount
we're
of
pumping
beer
out here.
shipping out of here,
Yeah,
for sure.
and in any given day, we can usually do a double canning run or a double bottling run, which will run us about somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 liters, or 100 hex. It depends on the season. January is a slow time.
Yeah.
New Year's resolutions, all that kind of stuff. So production sort of goes down, and we do other things. Like
Not
paint.
from us, though.
Well,
we
that's
drink.
right.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
We'll keep you guys.
We never
Good to
slow
hear.
down.
Good to hear. But in the summertime, and as we ramp up to summer, or when we're getting ready to release new products, and there may be a seasonal transition,
Right.
like with the liquor board or something like that, then we're doing full on 4 to 5 day a week production runs, maximizing our efficiency, and just we'll do a triple bottling run and run it for 12 hours with split shifts, just so that we can max out that capacity and
Absolutely.
and supply what we need. And that's something that we've learned through trial and error the hard way about how to keep up with demand and predict things, and because we don't we were in positions a couple years ago even where in the summertime we owed 50 pallets of beer, and that's 100 flats on a pallet. We don't want to be in that position, because that means that there's a shelf somewhere that doesn't have beer on it.
So talking about production-wise again, just getting back into that material. Where do you get all your stuff to make the beer?
We source our raw materials and ingredients from all over the world. We try our best to support local as much as we can, but in certain situations we want to be true to a recipe. So for example, if we do, a German Pilsner, we would like to use German malts or,
Right.
Hops, like specialty stuff that will be truer to the recipe itself. But yeah, we get a ton of hops from Yakima Valley. We get a ton of hops from the Southern Hemisphere as well, through Australia and New Zealand. Malt from North America, from Alberta. Get some of it out of the interior BC through an Armstrong. But really, it's we'll spend more to get the right ingredient. Like the vanilla in our vanilla stout is Madagascar vanilla beans that a local guy creates into an extract. We don't just go down to Costco and buy like a 50-liter jug or whatever. And we do our research. We sample other breweries' beers. We, when people go on trips to other beer cities like San Diego or Vancouver,
Doing the old market research.
Totally, yeah. You're trying new beers. You're bringing beers back. We're sampling stuff. So, like for example, we are releasing a white or a hazy IPA coming out in April, and so we've drank a lot of other hazy IPAs, and sort of doing some trial and errors and figuring out.
What works,
what doesn't, which ones we like, how did they make this beer, like stuff like that. And then as well as on our pilot system, I think we're into iteration 12. Basically, we'll taste ours, compare it. This needs to be, hazier, or it needs more pop or whatever it might need. So.
How many liters is that pilot system? Do you got like leftover liters? Just well, what happens with all that extra beer?
Yeah, our pilot system's pretty small. We can get probably about 40 liters out of it when it's all said and done, and so it's. But it's perfect because we can get a couple pony kegs. We'll throw it on the growler station here, so we can get actual feedback from our customers. So the first step is we'll do our own internal taste panel. Brewer, I'm usually involved, and then other people from various different parts of the brewery, so production, tasting room. We want everyone's input because all of our customers and fans are different people. It's not like they're all brewers. So you need the full range of people's palates and stuff like that to really
kind of hone it down.
Yeah, totally. We want that test market.
Nice.
So we'll do that first. That's when we give our honest feedback to the brewers, rankings and all that kind of stuff. And then it'll hit the growler station, and that's where Tiana and the people in the tasting room will get the direct feedback from the customers. And it's interesting because we'll put a couple out there, and it's like, oh, that version sold out in like 5 hours, and this one took 3 days.
How many people do you employ?
20. So, and that includes out-of-town reps. Yep. So, the majority of the staff probably is in like the brewing and production team, like as a whole. And we're fortunate enough that a lot of our people in the back are cross-trained, so they can sort of slide into various different positions and stuff like that. I mean, like when we started, there were 4 employees and everybody did everything. So the same guy brewing would be cellaring, and then he'd be kegging, and then he'd put the kegs in the truck and deliver them too. So every brewery has the same story basically when they start. It starts out something very small, and then it grows. But I think it's important to recognize that sort of like model is important to maintain, because we may seem like we occupy a large space, but we still are not a massive brewery, and we want to really stay true to that sort of core vibe.
Where do you find yourselves in the next 20 years? What's upward and onwards? What's going on?
Yeah, so over the last 20 years, we've had a lot of things change, and we've had to make things change when they haven't been changing enough. So I think in order for us to stay relevant in the next year, 5 years, 20 years, we've got to really find that balance of maintaining our existing fans, having the core lineup of, as I was saying earlier, the proven beers like Race Rocks and Shipwreck and stuff like that, while also sure, exactly, the coffee lager, and still being really focused on innovation and coming out with new and exciting beers that are going to pique people's interest, because when you've got 100 beers to choose from, people are going to go for the new one like a lot.
That's right. Yeah.
So we learned the hard way that sitting on the same beers and resting on your laurels is not the best way to go. Certainly not right now. So, but the underlying thing under all of it is that we can't waver from our philosophy on quality.
No.
Which we don't. So if we just go out there and try to make every beer the best that we can and have it taste good, then there you go. And it'll taste good to somebody. Yes. Like we make a Imperial IPA that's 9.1%. It's not for everybody. The guy who drinks lager is gonna hate it. He'll spit it out. But if you like Imperial IPAs, I think we make a pretty awesome one. So You
It's all
know?
preference. Yeah.
It is, and taste has always been subjective, and that's the big thing is that we don't rate beer because what does it matter if Rick is just like you said, if he's a lager drinker and you say, take a sip of this stout, it's the best stout on the planet. He's like, I don't like it.
Yeah.
So what does it matter? I mean, as long as you're making good quality beer in every step of the game, then that's all that you can do.
Yeah. So let's talk about new beers.
Sure.
Yeah. What's on the horizon? What do you got that's coming out? Is there anything new that you'd like to talk about? Anything top secret?
We're getting to the end of spring, or the end of winter, and our summer seasonals are going to start coming out, so that's pretty exciting. So we've had, as I was talking about earlier, the hazy IPA that's been in development for a couple months.
Wicked.
Yep. So that's called Ghost Ship, and
cool.
it's going to be a 4-pack tall can. It's going to be what you would expect from a hazy IPA if you're a fan.
Yeah.
So it'll be, hazy, juicy, like have a great aroma and flavor. Nice. And so far the prototypes, we're getting pretty deep into them. We've done about a dozen. They just keep getting better and better and better. And so we're super excited about that one. That'll be released in across the province as well as draft.
We'll be looking for that one.
Yeah. And preliminary artwork.
If we can find it.
Yeah, the artwork on that can's looking pretty slick too. So
Cool.
yeah, it lends itself to some pretty sweet imagery.
Oh,
so
I'm sure. Yeah.
Is it the same artwork that kind of lends itself to the Night Watch, or
it's a similar vibe to that. Yeah. It's a little darker.
Yeah. A little darker, but yeah.
It should be. Yeah, that's great.
If you're afraid of skulls and ghosts, you probably don't want to.
This isn't for you.
might have a nightmare or something.
Wicked.
Yeah,
I'm super pumped for that.
Yeah. So that'll be exciting, and that'll be private stores and government liquor stores in BC. So right now we have a Seaport Vanilla Stout, which is our winter bomber, which is an awesome beer.
It is dynamite for sure.
Good for milkshake floats if anybody wants to put some vanilla ice cream in there.
And on nitro.
And
on Nitro
Wicked
too.
on Nitro, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Good call,
Yeah,
Rick.
yeah, totally.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Making a fool of
And
yourself.
the nitro thing is something that we've just been experimenting with recently. We just did a small batch of Race Rocks Nitro, which is insane.
Really?
So good. And then there's a couple other beers coming out down the pipe a little later on in the summer, but those are top secret.
All right. So super top secret?
Super top secret.
Double top secret, probation.
Yes. It's classified. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
All right. Fair enough.
It is all about relationships in the beer community.
It is.
In general,
Yeah.
it really is
totally.
tight knit, and it's just it's a special thing. It's a special time, and we're again as consumers, I think that we're really, really lucky to have what we have at this point in time.
And being where we are.
Being where we are,
Yeah, Victoria is like
especially,
where everything started. So this
It's
is
awesome.
the best place to be.
Yeah.
It really is. We're spoiled.
Yeah, and it's an exciting time to be a fan too, because you can go to a store and just the format changes that we see. So like the bomber was the first sort of single serve, and then you're in single tall cans.
Yeah.
So you can try a ton of different beers. Like you don't have to commit to any one thing, which is good for the consumer. Sometimes not so great for the supplier.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's it allows people to really increase their scope, and so they can try a bunch of different things, learn what they like, what they don't like, and.
Well, once you find that beer as well, I mean, from a consumer standpoint, you find something that you like, and you'll always, perhaps maybe you'll go out and buy that bomber as a one-off, but then you're going to stick to what you like. Yep. And then kind of venture out from there a little bit, but you're always coming home.
Ultimately, we're all sort of in this thing together. It's a fun industry to be in for sure.
Yeah.
It's very creative, and making beer for a living is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I would think so. Drinking it is too.
There you go. You guys have a pretty good job too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for your time. That
no
was
worries.
fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Always a pleasure, man, for sure. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Rick,
And I'm Andy.
And I'm Ben.
and we're here at Lighthouse Brewing Company,
Victoria, British Columbia, Canada.
and we've
Been there, tap that.